Welcome to this trip through one of the most upsetting cases ever recorded in Savannah, Georgia's history. Before we start, please leave a comment letting me know where you are watching from and what time you are listening to this story. We want to know where these written accounts go and when they get there. On a clear fall morning in 1854, the people who lived near Forsyth Park in Savannah woke up to find a small, leather-bound book tied to the wrought iron fence around the new fountain. The pages were yellowed and warped from moisture, and they had handwritten entries that covered almost 2 years. There was only one name on the first page: Clara. There were no calls to investigators, and no reports were filed. The groundskeeper put the book in his pocket, and later he said he hadn't found anything that morning. But by then, the word had already spread through the neighborhoods behind the big houses on Drayton Street. Something had been found that wasn't meant to be read. In 1868, while workers were fixing up the attic of an old mansion on Abercorn Street, they found a loose floorboard. Underneath it was a sealed tin box that looked like it had a journal, some folded papers, and a small cloth pouch with human hair in it. The contractor, a northern man with no ties to the previous owners, turned these items over to a local historian who cataloged them before they were transferred to Savannah's municipal archives. The papers stayed there untouched until a graduate student from Emory University asked to see them in 1965. The student gave up on his thesis 3 weeks after starting his research and went back to his family's home in Massachusetts. The collection was lost when the archive was reorganized. The following is a story made up of these papers, newspaper articles, property records, and the bits and pieces of memories from people who said they knew the truth. The Forsyth house was 3 stories tall and had white columns and wraparound porches. It was one of the best houses in Savannah's historic district. William Forsyth made a lot of money in shipping and cotton. He owned 3 ships that went back and forth between Savannah and Liverpool on a regular basis. People knew his wife, Margaret, for her garden parties and work with the Episcopal Church to help others. Their daughters were Sarah, who was 19, and Emily, who was 22. The household staff included a cook, 2 house servants, a groundskeeper, and a coachman. All of these people were slaves, and their names only appear in property records and bills of sale. William Forsyth came back from a business trip to Charleston in the spring of 1853 with a new member of the family, a young woman named Clara. The county's records show that she was bought from the Mayfield plantation outside of Charleston for a price that was much higher than what the market value was at the time. The paper said she was 20 years old, could read, do fine needlework, and run a household. It also said she was quiet, polite, and had never been known to resist. The document didn't say anything about her looks, but later, in quiet conversations, neighbors and visitors would remember them. People who knew her as Clara Mayfield said she had an unsettling beauty. Records from Street. John's Episcopal Church show that the rector's wife said it was wrong for such a creature to be there during services, even though Clara sat in the segregated gallery with other enslaved people. A cotton broker's daughter who was visiting wrote in her diary that during dinner at the Forsyth home, she saw how Mother kept changing her posture to block Father's view of the girl serving behind her. For the first 3 months after she got there, Clara worked with the other household staff, mostly helping with the daughter's clothes and serving at formal dinners. People who lived nearby said they saw her going shopping with Mrs. Forsyth and her daughters, carrying packages and holding parasols. Then, all of a sudden, she was gone from the public eye. Margaret Forsyth told her friends at a sewing circle that Clara had been moved to work upstairs and would no longer be serving at social events. Years later, the cook told a Freedmen's Bureau official that Mr. Forsyth had the attic space remodeled around this time, adding a separate staircase that could only be reached through his study. Payments to a carpenter for special work on the 3rd floor and the purchase of a secure door with iron fittings are listed in the household ledger. Sarah Forsyth's personal diary, which was found in a tin box under the attic floorboards, has an interesting entry from the 18th of July, 1853. Mother has taken to her bed again with her headaches. Father says it is the heat, but I know better. It began after she found him in Clara's quarters late at night. Now he has moved Clara upstairs where Mother cannot go because of her weak heart. The stairs are too steep, he says, but I have seen him climb them 3 times today. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house grows. The cook said that food had to be left outside the attic door at certain times. Mr. Forsyth was the only person who could go in. In September, Emily Forsyth got engaged to the son of another well-known Savannah family. The wedding preparations took up all of the family's time. Sarah only writes about Clara once during this time. I heard sounds from above last night, not footsteps, but something being dragged across the floor, then crying. I asked Father at breakfast if Clara was sick. He said I was imagining things and that I should never say her name at the table again. The wedding happened in November of 1853. Pictures kept by the Savannah Historical Society show the Forsyth family, William, Margaret, Emily in her wedding dress, and Sarah as maid of honor, standing on the steps of Christ Church. Their faces are serious, which was normal for photos from that time. A servant from the house stands behind them, just out of sight in the doorway. The cook's testimony says that this person is Bessie, who took over as the family's main housekeeper from Clara. Margaret Forsyth went to Charleston in December to see her sister. She brought Sarah with her. Ship manifests say they stayed there for 6 weeks. William Forsyth stayed behind because he had business to take care of. This is when the first written proof of what was going on in the attic came to light. The Georgia Historical Society has a ledger from the Forsyth shipping office that has a strange note on the back pages. A series of dates and notes written in William Forsyth's handwriting say things like December 14, refused food, December 15, still refused, administered discipline, December 16, accepted water only, December 17, full compliance restored. There are more of these entries through January. When Margaret and Sarah got back in February 1854, people who lived nearby said that William had changed. He was irritable, distracted, and often left the house before dawn and came back late at night. The cook remembered that he now ate all of his meals in his study and needed a bottle of whiskey and Clara's food tray left outside the attic door every night. Sarah's diary entries from this time show that she was becoming more and more worried. Father looks through us at dinner as if we are not there. Mother pretends not to notice, but I have heard her crying at night twice. Now I have seen scratches on Father's face, which he says are from his new hunting dog. But the dog is kept in the carriage house, and the scratches appear after he spends the night in his study, which is next to the new staircase. William Forsyth bought more iron fittings from a blacksmith shop on Bay Street in March 1854. Business records show that the receipt was for window securities and restraints. That same month, Sarah wrote in her diary that she had started to hear singing from the attic, mostly hymns, but sometimes strange melodies I don't recognize. The voice is Clara's, but it's different somehow, harsher. When I told Bessie about the singing, she crossed herself and wouldn't talk about it. There were 2 big things that happened in April for the Forsyth family. First, Sarah got engaged to a young lawyer from a Savannah family that was respectable but not rich. William Forsyth was very against the match and even threatened to cut her off. Second, Margaret Forsyth got sick with what the family doctor called nervous exhaustion. He told her to stay in bed and gave her laudanum, which kept her sleepy most days. Sarah took over running the house because her mother was sick and her father was spending less and less time with the family. Her diary says that she told Bessie to put more food on Clara's tray, like fruit and sweet breads that might make her feel better. She also writes about her attempts to get to the attic. I tried the door to Father's study while he was at work, but it was locked. I pressed my ear to the door that I think leads to the attic stairs and called Clara's name. There was a sound like fingernails on wood, and then nothing. William's ledger entries get more and more random during this time. April 23rd. Behavior improved after correction. April 25. Found implement hidden in bedding, removed all comforts as punishment. April 30th. Attempted to speak to me of outside, reminded her of her place. May 4th. Compliance achieved through usual methods. There was a fire in the kitchen of the Forsyth home on the 10th of May, 1854. Reports in the newspaper say that the cook had left a pot unattended while doing laundry. The fire was stopped before it could spread to other parts of the house, but the smoke did damage parts of the main house. Insurance records show that everyone in the house was safely evacuated, including Margaret Forsyth, who the coachman carried out of her bedroom. What the newspapers didn't say, but what Sarah's diary does, is that while her father was in the yard directing the fire brigade, she took the key to his study from his waistcoat. "I had maybe 5 minutes," she wrote. "The study door opened easily. The second door, which went up to the second floor, needed 2 keys, one for the lock and one for a bolt. I was so scared that I almost dropped them. The smell that came down the stairs was like rotting flowers, unwashed bodies, and something sickly sweet. I called her name as I climbed, but there was no answer." Sarah wrote 4 pages in her diary about what she found in the attic. As the story goes on, her handwriting gets messier and messier. She talks about a room that is split into 2. There was a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair that was bolted to the floor in the first room. The second room, which could only be locked from the outside, was empty except for iron rings set into the wall at different heights. Sarah wrote, "The Clara I found was not the Clara who had come to our house. Her hair had been cut close to her scalp, and her arms showed signs of being restrained. When she saw me, she pressed herself against the far wall and started to recite what sounded like Bible verses, but the words were wrong in some way. I told her about the fire and that we had to leave. She laughed, which made my blood freeze, and asked if I had been sent to test her again. When I reached for her hand, she flinched as if she thought I was going to hit her." William Forsythe's voice, calling from below, stopped Sarah's attempt to lead Clara down from the attic. Her diary says, "I begged her to come with me and promised to hide her somewhere safe, but she shook her head. 'There is nowhere he will not find me,' she said, 'and then it will be worse for us both.' I knew she was telling the truth. The only thing I had of value was the cameo brooch Mother had given me for my birthday. I pressed it into her hand and told her I would find a way to help her. The look she gave me showed no hope." Sarah had to leave Clara in the attic and give her father's waistcoat keys back before he noticed they were missing. That night, she says she heard William Forsythe's footsteps on the attic stairs, followed by sounds no decent person should describe. Her diary says she decided to ask her fiancé, Thomas Harper, for help. Savannah's records show that Thomas Harper was a junior partner at a law firm that worked on shipping contracts and estate planning. His letters to Sarah, which are kept in the tin box, show that he was truly worried about what she was saying, but he was too afraid to directly confront someone of William Forsythe's stature. He wrote, "The law gives property owners certain rights, using deliberately vague language, but there are limits to what civilized society can accept. If what you say is true, intervention may be necessary. However, we must proceed with extreme caution." In late May and early June, Sarah and Thomas wrote letters to each other about different ways to deal with Clara's situation. Thomas quietly asked about legal cases involving the treatment of enslaved people. He learned that there were laws against extreme cruelty, but they were rarely enforced when the accused was a rich white man. At the same time, William Forsythe's behavior became more and more strange. The household accounts show that he bought a lot of alcohol, and Sarah's diary says that he was always in a state of rage or collapse. Margaret Forsythe died suddenly on the 12th of June, 1854. Heart failure was given as the official cause of death, but there were rumors that she had taken too much laudanum, either on purpose or by accident. Sarah's diary entry for that day is short. "Mother is gone. Father locked himself in his study when the doctor confirmed it. I heard him climbing the stairs soon after. His grief takes a form I cannot bear to think about." There was more instability in the Forsythe home in the weeks after Margaret's funeral. William would go missing for days at a time, only to come back looking disheveled and smelling like alcohol. Sarah said that when he was gone, she would leave food outside the attic door, but it was often untouched. "I've called to her through the door," she wrote, "but she never answers. Sometimes I think I hear movement inside, like something scraping against the floor, but it could be rats in the walls." William Forsythe said in early July that he was going to New York for work and would be gone for at least 2 weeks. The day after he left, Sarah and Thomas Harper, along with a locksmith who had promised to keep quiet, went into the house to free Clara. Sarah's diary and Thomas's later statement to the Freedmen's Bureau tell what they saw. There were no people in the attic rooms. The bed was bare, and the washstand was turned over. A thorough search found bloodstains on the walls and floorboards that someone had tried to clean. In the smaller room, one of the iron rings had been pulled partway out of the wall, breaking the wood around it. Finding a hidden compartment under a loose floorboard that held the tin box that would be found again in 1868 was the most shocking thing. Clara's journal was inside. The journal, which Thomas thought was written on paper taken from William Forsyth's shipping ledgers, tells the story of Clara's time in the attic from her point of view. The writing starts out neat and educated, but it gets worse over time. The first entries talk about how William Forsyth's demands are getting bigger, and how Clara tries to calm him down while still keeping her dignity. She writes about how she sings to herself when she's alone, counts the nails in the floorboards, and makes up long stories in her head about the people who walk by her tiny window. As the journal goes on, the entries get less and less connected. Clara talks about talking to people who aren't there, seeing her mother who died years ago on the Mayfield plantation, and making more and more detailed plans to get away. The last entries, written about 2 weeks before Sarah and Thomas found the empty rooms, are very scary. They say, "He thinks I'm broken, so I've let myself look broken. I've studied his habits and weaknesses. The door has 2 locks, but the window only has iron bars. He doesn't know that I've been working at them every night with the edge of the chamber pot I broke on purpose against the wall months ago. 1 bar is now loose enough. I'm so thin now that I think I can fit through. It's 3 stories to the ground, but there's an oak tree whose branches reach within a few feet of this window. I've measured the distance with my eye 1,000 times. Tomorrow night, he leaves for his club. I'll wait until the house is quiet. Then, I'll try to escape. If I succeed, I'll find a way north. If I fail and survive, I'll find another way out that can't be blocked by bars or doors. He will never cage me again." There is no record of what happened to Clara Mayfield after that night. No one was ever found on the Forsyth property. Savannah's records from that time do not show any reports of a young woman who was hurt or killed. The groundskeeper, who later claimed to have found the leather book by Forsyth Park Fountain in October 1854, described its contents as the ravings of someone who had lost their mind to fear, but could recall no specific details about what it contained. William Forsyth came back from New York to find that his daughter had moved out of the family home and into her fiancé's mother's house. This was a huge break from social norms that caused a lot of gossip. Thomas Harper is said to have given Forsyth copies of Clara's journal and told him that they would keep the documents as insurance against any retaliation, even though they had no plans to make the matter public. The wedding happened in September, and William Forsyth was not there. William Forsyth sold his home in Savannah and moved to New Orleans by December 1854. He died there in 1859 from what his death certificate calls complications of alcoholism. After the Civil War, a Northern family bought the house on Abercorn Street. Before that, it had many owners. They found the tin box while they were fixing up the house. During the Civil War and Reconstruction, Sarah and Thomas Harper stayed in Savannah. Thomas's law firm eventually focused on cases that had to do with the rights of people who had been slaves. People knew Sarah for her work, setting up schools for kids who had been freed. Neither of them ever talked about Clara Mayfield or what happened at the Forsyth home in public, but their private letters show that they kept looking for information about her fate for many years. An abolitionist friend in Philadelphia wrote to Thomas in 1862 about meeting a woman who said she had escaped from Savannah by climbing out of an attic window and traveling north on the Underground Railroad. The woman, who only went by Mercy, had scars on her wrists and ankles that looked like they had been tied up for a long time. When people asked her about her past, she would only say, "That woman is dead. I watched her fall from a window and shatter on the ground below. I am someone new now." Thomas sent this letter to Sarah with a note that said, "Could it be her? I can't say for sure, but I hope so." The Savannah Historical Society says that the story of Clara Mayfield is most likely a mix of several real events that have been told and retold over time, adding to the story. There is no solid proof that a young woman was locked up in the attic of the Forsyth home. In 1965, the tin box and its contents, which included Clara's journal and Sarah's diary, were cataloged. However, they were reported missing during an inventory the next year. The graduate student who stopped working on his research never published his results and turned down all requests for interviews until he died in 1987. People who visit the house on Abercorn Street, which is now divided into apartments, sometimes report strange things happening there. For example, they hear soft singing from the third floor when no one is there, feel like they are being watched while climbing the stairs, and smell flowers in rooms where there are none. People who live there now know not to tell potential tenants about these things. There is a marker in the small cemetery behind St. John's Episcopal Church that says, "She found her freedom." It was put there in 1879 and has no name. Local tour guides will tell you that the grave belongs to a young woman who died tragically in one of Savannah's grand homes. They say she is beautiful, smart, and ultimately doomed because of those things. No one knows for sure if this marker has anything to do with Clara Mayfield. It's just another story whispered in a city where secrets are buried just below the surface. Some people still say that if you stand under the oak trees near the old Forsyth property on a quiet night, you might hear a soft voice singing hymns from somewhere above. Changed hymns, with the words changed so that they don't talk about going to heaven but about getting away from this world. Some people say the singing is just the wind in the Spanish moss, which is a normal thing that people who know the house's history give supernatural meaning to. But even these skeptics tend to quicken their pace as they pass by, their eyes fixed firmly ahead, refusing to look up at the small attic window where a desperate young woman might once have stood, measuring the distance to the ground, calculating the risk of falling against the certainty of remaining caged. A private collector who focused on artifacts related to Southern history was said to have seen the leather-bound book that started this investigation again in 1932. When a researcher from Emory University asked the collector about it, he said he didn't have it. After he died in 1958, his collection was given to different institutions, but no catalog ever listed a journal that matched the description of the one found at Forsyth Park. Like Clara herself, it is now only a memory and a story, always just out of reach of solid proof. The oak tree that might have helped Clara get away was cut down in 1943 because it was damaged in a storm. The man who cut it down said he found a small cameo brooch from the 1,850 seconds deep inside the trunk. The Historical Society got this item, but it went missing from their collection during the same reorganization that took the tin box and its contents. We still don't know the whole truth about Clara Mayfield, who she was, what she went through, and how her story ended. All we have are bits and pieces of documents, whispered rumors, and the feeling that people who visit the house get that someone is watching from the attic window, still waiting for the right moment to try to escape across a dangerous gap, choosing the risk of destruction over the certainty of continued confinement. Maybe the scariest part of her story is the choice she made. Not what happened to her, but what she thought about doing to herself. Some of Savannah's oldest families still won't talk about the Forsyth name or admit that they are related to William Forsyth in their family trees. A magnolia tree, which is said to have been planted to cover ground where no grass would grow, is the only thing that marks the spot where his house used to be. As they show visitors around the historic district, tour guides point it out and say that its location is based on different legends and superstitions. None of them talk about Clara Mayfield or the attic room. Even in a city that makes money from its haunted history, some stories are still too scary to tell again. There is now a gap in the catalog of the municipal archives where the graduate student did his failed research in 1965. This is where the Forsyth family records should be. When asked about the difference, archivists said that some items were damaged by flooding in the 1,970 seconds and had to be thrown away. It is unclear whether this explanation is true in a bureaucratic sense or if it is just something that institutions forget. What is still clear is that the story of Clara Mayfield, the most beautiful slave who was kept in the attic, is still a part of Savannah's history. It is not fully documented or completely erased, but it is a whisper that won't go away. Maybe that persistence is a kind of justice in and of itself, making sure that what happened in that attic room isn't completely forgotten. Some horrors should be remembered, as Sarah Harper wrote to her husband near the end of her life. Not to satisfy our morbid curiosity, but to remind us of what people can do to each other and what we need to be careful of in ourselves and our society. If Clara's story serves that purpose, then her pain may still bring something good. Today, as you walk around Savannah, look up at the attic windows of the big old houses. Now, most of them are empty or used for storage. They say that one of them still has a light on some nights when the rest of the house is dark. Not a light bulb, but the flickering light of a candle that moves slowly back and forth, as if someone is watching and waiting for the house to quiet down so they can try to escape. Historians looking at this case in the modern era have found a number of inconsistencies that make them doubt the story's truth, more than a century and a half after Clara Mayfield may have made hers. There is a letter in the Emory University archives from 1967 from the graduate student who gave up on his thesis. It is addressed to his former advisor. He says that while he was doing his research, an old woman who only said she was a descendant of the Harper family came up to him. She told him to give up on his project because some stories are better left alone. When he kept asking for more information about Clara Mayfield, the woman reportedly said, "There was no Clara. There were many Claras." The name was changed to protect not the guilty, but those who came after. This mysterious statement fits with census records from 1850 that show that at least 17 enslaved women named Clara lived in Chatham County at the time. It wasn't unusual for more than one person to have the same name, which made it hard for historians to find specific people in official records. It's still not clear if Clara Mayfield was one woman or a mix of several. In 1972, while workers were fixing up another historic Savannah home that was less than a mile from the old Forsyth property, they found a small space behind a fake wall in the attic. There was a hairbrush with dark hair in it, a torn piece of calico fabric, and a small book of hymns with some verses written in a different handwriting than the marginalia in the rest of the text. The most noticeable change was next to the hymn Amazing Grace, where the line, "I once was lost, but now am found," had been changed to "I once was found, but now am lost." The homeowners were upset by what they found and asked that no more investigation be done. The items were sealed inside the wall, where they are likely still there today. A year later, a PhD student at Howard University found shipping records that showed William Forsyth's business trips to Charleston often coincided with slave auctions, where fancy girls were sold. These were young enslaved women who were sold for sexual exploitation rather than work. These records show that Forsyth made at least 6 trips like this between 1850 and 1854, and then he went back to Savannah. Records of property show that during this time, only one enslaved person, Clara, was bought. No one knows what happened to any of the others he may have gotten. Parish records from St. John's Episcopal Church show another strange thing. In December 1854, 2 months after William Forsyth moved to New Orleans, Thomas Harper paid for a series of special prayers for the soul of someone who had died in unclear circumstances. The church registry doesn't say who these prayers are for. It just calls them a woman known to God. This is the same time that Sarah Harper wrote her last diary entry about Clara, in which she said, "Thomas believes we should accept that she is gone, whether to freedom or to God's embrace. I cannot do so without some ritual of remembrance, some acknowledgement that she existed and suffered in this world. If we let her disappear without a trace, we become complicit in her erasure." The oral history tradition among Savannah's African American community includes many stories about a woman who flew out of an attic window to escape captivity. Folklore researchers gathered these stories in the 1970 seconds. They tell of a woman who was so determined to be free that she turned into a bird, or in some versions, birds carried her away instead of staying in prison. Scholars observe that transformation narratives frequently functioned as metaphorical recountings of genuine escapes, with flight symbolizing both physical and spiritual liberation. It is impossible to say for sure if these stories have anything to do with Clara Mayfield, but the themes are very similar. Sarah Harper started a small charity in 1880 to help young women of color get an education. The foundation's charter document, which is still kept in county records, says that it is dedicated to the memory of one whose name cannot be spoken, whose suffering cannot be measured, and whose courage cannot be forgotten. The Harper Educational Trust kept this work going until 1943, when it became part of a bigger foundation that still gives out scholarships today. Not many people who get the money know where it came from, or the story of the woman who may have inspired it. After Thomas Harper died in 1892, his legal papers were given to the University of Georgia Law School. They include drafts of laws he suggested during Reconstruction that would have made certain types of mistreatment of former slaves illegal. One draft bill that was never introduced to the legislature had language that was unusually detailed and said that no one could be kept in places that weren't safe for people to live in, like attics, cellars, or other rooms that didn't have enough light, air, or ways to get out. In Harper's handwriting, Marginalia asks if such specificity would be politically possible, and then says, "Too revealing of specific case, revised to more general terms." The most convincing proof of what happened to Clara Mayfield came to light in 1985, when an architectural preservationist looking at the oak tree behind the old Forsyth property saw strange scars on several branches that reached toward the house. Tree ring analysis showed that these branches had been badly damaged around 1854, which fits with the idea that they broke after being suddenly weighed down. It is unclear if this was proof that Clara tried to escape, or if it was just damage from the storm. However, the preservationist who wrote the report said that the pattern was more likely to be the result of human activity than natural causes. During an archaeological survey of the property in 2003, ground-penetrating radar found a small anomaly under what would have been the back garden in the 1,850 seconds. City rules said that digging up land without proof of historical importance was against the law, and the current owners of the property chose not to look into it any further. The anomaly is still unexplored, which adds to the mystery of Clara's story. In 2008, the American Historical Review published an article that looked at the case as an example of how the experiences of enslaved women often go unnoticed in history. They are only recorded in bits and pieces, hints, and whispers, and not with the same level of detail as other historical subjects. The author says that Clara Mayfield's story is hard to find, which shows how the experiences of enslaved women have been left out of history books. They say, the absence of definitive evidence is itself evidence of a different kind, evidence of systematic silencing. That silencing is still going on today. Researchers trying to get to the Forsyth family papers that are still in different archives often run into strange restrictions or are told that the materials aren't available because of conservation issues. Historians are still not sure if this is because of institutional caution or the lasting power of Southern families. Some people think that some parts of Clara's story are too close to things that people don't want to talk about the South before the Civil War. In 2011, a historical novelist looking into Clara's story had a strange experience while visiting the site of the old Forsyth home. As she stood under the new magnolia tree at dusk, she said she heard what sounded like singing coming from above. It was a woman's voice, clear but far away, singing something that sounded like a hymn but with different words. She saw what looked like a person in the third-floor window of the building next door when she looked up. She looked into it and found that the building didn't have a third floor because it was made shorter during renovations in the 1920 seconds. The novelist gave up on her project not long after, saying in letters to her publisher that she was uncomfortable with the material. There is no mention of Clara Mayfield in the Savannah Tourism Board's official history books. Ghost tour companies often tell some version of her story on their nighttime trips through the historic district, but the details are very different from one telling to the next. Some people say she is a normal ghost who haunts the place where she died. Some people see her as a symbol of resistance whose spirit stayed behind to witness the crimes done against her. Some people even say that she never existed and that she is a made-up person who stands for all the unnamed enslaved women who went through the same things in Savannah's big houses. The truth may be somewhere in the middle of these two views. Clara Mayfield, whether that was her real name or one assigned to her, may have been one woman who endured specific horrors in a specific attic room, or she may represent many women whose stories have been lost to history, preserved only in fragments of documents, oral traditions, and the persistent discomfort that certain historic properties evoke in sensitive visitors. Either way, her story is a reminder of the pain that lies behind the beautiful surface of Savannah's history, the pain that made the beauty that tourists come to see. When workers cut down the magnolia tree that had been on the old Forsyth property for more than 100 years in 2017, they found a small metal object deep inside the trunk. Initial excitement that it might be Sarah Harper's cameo brooch faded when closer examination revealed it to be a simple iron key of 19th century manufacture. Metallurgical analysis indicated it had been placed in the crotch of the young tree sometime around 1860, becoming enveloped as the tree grew. Another question that has not been answered in Clara's story is whether this key used to open the attic door in the Forsyth home and who might have put it there. That year, an old woman went to the Savannah Historical Society and said she was a descendant of someone who had known Clara Mayfield. She brought with her a folded piece of paper that she said had been preserved in her family for generations. On it was written a single line in faded ink: "She made it to Philadelphia." When asked who had written this note or how they knew this information, the woman said only that it had been passed down with instructions that it should eventually be returned to Savannah when it was safe to tell the truth. Even though archivists tried to get more information, the woman left without giving her name. The note was added to the collection, but disappeared during a catalog update the following year. Using modern forensic methods on pictures of the bloodstains Sarah wrote about in her diary shows that what she thought was evidence of violence might have been evidence of giving birth. There are no records of any child connected to Clara, but some historians think she may have been pregnant when she escaped or was taken out of the attic. If such a child existed, its fate is yet another mystery surrounding this case. Sarah wrote a letter to her daughter in 1879, just before she died. The letter is part of the Harper family papers that are kept by descendants in Massachusetts. It contains what may be the closest thing to a conclusion in Clara Mayfield's story. "I have carried this knowledge like a stone in my heart for 25 years. I tell you now, not to burden you, but so that someone will remember when I am gone. I believe she escaped that night. I believe she lived. In my final dream of her, she is standing beneath a northern sky, face turned upward, breathing air that belongs to no master. Whether this is truth, or merely the wish my mind has shaped into memory, I cannot say, but I choose to believe it. We must believe that some escape is possible, even from the darkest places we create for one another. History doesn't tell us for sure if Clara Mayfield found that escape, if she lived or died, if she reached freedom or found another end. Her story exists now primarily as a whisper that passes between those willing to look beyond Savannah's polished exterior to the painful truths beneath. As you walk through those old streets, past homes where enslaved people lived, worked, and suffered, pay close attention. Some say you can still hear singing from an attic window, not a lament, but a hymn transformed into something else. A declaration that even in the most confining darkness, the human spirit seeks light, seeks freedom, seeks escape. A statement that some stories will not be silenced, no matter how hard power tries to erase them. The Forsyth home still has one entry in the property ledger at the Savannah Municipal Archives. It is dated July 1854. It notes only one female servant departed without leave. No further details are provided. No search was recorded. There are no ads in local newspapers from that time asking for her capture. It is as if, having left that attic room, whether through the window, the door, or some other means, Clara Mayfield stepped out of documented history and into something else. Legend, memory, or perhaps a life finally her own, unrecorded by those who had previously claimed ownership of even her name. And perhaps that absence from the record is its own kind of victory. The final escape from a system that sought to document, categorize, and control every aspect of her existence. In disappearing from the archives, she may have achieved what she sought that night in the attic. A life beyond the reach of those who had imprisoned her. A story that belonged to her alone. People who visit Savannah and hear Clara's story often look up at the attic windows of old homes and think about who might have been locked up behind them. Some people say they feel like they're being watched as they walk by certain houses. Others claim to hear singing on quiet nights, carried on the breeze that moves through the Spanish moss. Tour guides say that these kinds of things are just the power of suggestion at work. Once you know a story, you start to see proof of it everywhere. But perhaps those sensations represent something else, not Clara's ghost, but her legacy. The discomfort that visitors experience may stem from acknowledging long-suppressed truths regarding the foundations of Savannah's beauty. The feeling of being watched could be the weight of history's gaze, which makes people remember what happened in those beautiful homes. The singing, whether real or imagined, could be the voice of memory that won't be quieted. There is no body, grave, or even a clear record of Clara Mayfield's life left. A story that keeps being told despite all efforts to erase it is what remains. It reminds us that the most beautiful facades can hide the darkest truths, and that the human spirit always seeks freedom, whether it's through a window, flight, transformation, or just being remembered by those who come after. As you move on with your day after reading this story, you might think about Clara and what happened to her after that night in the attic. In doing so, you participate in the one form of justice history has afforded her, the refusal to let her story disappear entirely. We may never know for sure what happened to the most beautiful slave who was locked up in the attic, but we can make sure that the question itself and the truths it tells us about our past keep ringing out through time and asking to be heard.